Hello, today is October 17th, 1992. My name is Scott Sullivan, and I'm an alcoholic. I invite you to listen to an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous at the Manassas Group in Manassas, Virginia. Today is the 41st anniversary of the Manassas Group. Ed Ash of Elkton, Virginia is speaking. I thank you, and I hope you will enjoy this tape.
I'd like to get this meeting started by everybody sharing with me with a Trinity prayer, please. God, grant me the Trinity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. My name is Huey, and I'm a very grateful recovering alcoholic. Hi, folks, and I want to welcome you to our 41st Alcoholics Anonymous anniversary, and I think that's fantastic. 41 years of AA, all in the same group.
Hi everybody, I'm Harold and I'm an alcoholic. Hi Harold. Sure is great to be here and to be sober. This is a preamble of Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Thank you.
My name is Larry, and I'm an alcoholic. And this is how it works from Chapter 5 of the Big Book. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed their path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. At some of these we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that we deal with alcohol. Cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We ask his protection and care with complete abandon. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry the message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Many of us exclaimed, "What an order! I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after made three pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. C, that God could and would if He were sought. Thank you.
Years ago, back before I really got sober in this fellowship, I met Ed around the fellowship, because I was around here a few years. I wasn't ready to stop drinking. I wasn't no alcoholic yet myself. But anyhow, that's a story by itself. Ed, I know, has been on the road this morning. He got up about 5 o'clock and left Ocean City and drove all the way back to Elkton, Virginia, and then back down here. So this gentleman, there's no doubt in my mind, he still, always has ever since I've known him, put AA first. I've never seen him turn down anything he's ever asked to do in Alcoholics Anonymous. He's always willing and anxious to do it. I don't want to take up any more of his time. Let's give him a big welcome. Ed Ash from Elkton, Virginia. Come on.
I could say, who am I and what I'm doing here? But I am Ed Ash, and I'm a very grateful alcoholic. And a lot of it came kind of like that, what I just said, because when I got here, I had no idea who I was. I didn't have any idea what was wrong with me. I'm one of these drunks that came in here not intending to get sober. I wanted my life to change. I didn't think much about getting sober. That's one of the miracles of this fellowship. When you called, a lot of things went through my mind that night. First of all, we wanted to talk about the 41st anniversary. And it was 41 years ago this month that my wife and I got married. And the other thing that went through my mind, 41 years. I wonder if someone ever tried to keep a record of the people that went through these doors of this fellowship right here, and the changes that came into their lives, their families' lives, their employers. AA is one of the strongest movements that's ever been known, I'm sure. I get emotional sometimes when I get talking about belonging to a fellowship like this. I came into this fellowship in the way that so many drunks came in. I come in off the 9th Street of Washington, D.C. I had no other place to go. My wife had left me. I was unemployable. I'd been drunk for about 3 years, maybe longer. My story will tell you a little bit about that. And I had no idea that I was an alcoholic. A lot of people call me an alcoholic, but that was a compliment from the bum that I really was. When I come into the fellowship, I come into a place called the Salvation Army Arborlight on 9th and I Street in Washington, D.C. And this was on April 23rd, 1963. There's been a lot of changes in Washington since then. But there's been a lot of change in me since then, too, through the help of you people in this Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I got to Washington, went into that place, man told me something that I hope that I never forget. He said, you never have to sober up again if you don't want to. And that made sense. But you know, this just wasn't my life. I had spent 30 years drinking. In sometime first part of next year, around April of next year, I'll be sober half of my life. Due to grace of God and you people. When I walked through those doors of the Harbor Light, I had no idea that would have been my last drink. I went in to get the monkey off my back. You know, I needed a place to stay. It was getting cold out at nights, and I needed someone to talk to, and I just needed help. I have no idea what kind, but I knew I needed help. And this fellow that took me into the Harbor Light became my sponsor. Now, it's one of these miracles that came in here that I never had to ask for a sponsor. I got one. So many things that I received that were so freely given to me through this fellowship that I hear and see so many people struggle with. Bob became my sponsor because we sat and talked for just a little while, and Bob said to me, well, has it always been like this? And I said, no, Bob, this is the first time I've ever been in this position. And he looked at me, and as I look back now, hindsight is 20/20. And it's the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen when I look back at my life. If I had my choice today to change anything that I wanted to change back in these few years of my life, I would have to turn it all down, because it took everything that happened out there to give me what I have tonight. And so Bob knew that he had a right one, because I'd started out the first question he asked me lying to him, and you know, and it just got worse from there. And he enjoyed it, and I didn't drink. And I went into this place, and they had 60 beds in this room, in this place, and this was right before a full moon. And he said, we don't have any empty beds tonight, but if you don't mind sleeping on a couch or making a pallet on the floor, I'm sure by tomorrow night this time we'll have a bed for you. And the full moon came, and the drunks went, and I had my choice of beds the next night. And I learned something that night, and I've learned it ever since. Usually my phone rings the most when we've got a full moon. And I watch this because, you know, I enjoy working with new people. I enjoy being around new people coming into the fellowship. I enjoy seeing them coming in and getting their lives together. I see them enjoy coming in and getting jobs and being proud of themselves and going to AA meetings and taking a part in it. And I'm so proud to be here tonight to help you celebrate the 41st anniversary here. I was no different than most drunks, I guess. It was alcohol that got me here. I don't know anything about drugs. I was just a drunk. I had no idea what was happening to me in life. I just knew that every time I drank, something happened. I didn't know until I come in here, though, that every time I drank, that my life became a little bit more unmanageable. I can go way back in my drinking. I was born some 2 pounds and 3 ounces. Said I wouldn't live through the night. My grandmother put brandy in my milk. My milk decreased, brandy increased, and I became a young drunk. I left home when I was 13 because of booze. My mother had passed away, and people didn't like the way I was living, and I didn't like the way they was living, so I left. I left school when I was 17 for the same reason. I would go into these places with a new broom, sweeping clean, try to make people, have a little respect for me and me respect them, and to be a model U.S. American, all-American boy. And it just seems that every time I'd get a little booze in me, it would just increase and increase until the point I'd be in so much trouble I'd have to leave. So when I was 17, I'd had to leave school, and I joined the Navy, and that's a story within itself. I forged my own papers and used silver dollar for a seal for Notary Public and did some scribbling on it, so the government was really in bad shape then. And I ended up in Great Lakes, Illinois on March the 7th, and I had just turned 17 years old. And I can remember going into boot camp. When I left Washington, I left in shirt sleeves It was warm here, and I pulled up in Chicago, and the wind was blowing, the snow was up to my knees. I was about to freeze to death, and they took us into the boot place and fixed us all up over there at the Camp David. I can remember as the days went on there how much I really liked the Navy. It was an ideal way of life for me. And I tell you this because this is a part of my stories that made me realize that there was something wrong with me, that I needed help. And I stayed in boot camp, and there was some 45 of us there in the battalion. And most of them were all either homesick for their families, their girlfriends, or just homesick because they was away from home the first time. And I loved every minute of it because 2 or 3 things was happening in my life that probably had never happened in theirs. I'd never thought to question anything like that, but I had someone to tell me what time to go to bed, what time to get up, what to wear, when to wear it, how to eat. They did everything. I had no thinking to do. I had no responsibility. All I had to do was show up. The little physical work that they had to do was minor to what I had been doing just to survive the type of life that I had been living even at that age. Because being the alcoholic, life was a struggle for me then. And I decided in those few days of boot camp that I would just make a career of this Navy. I wouldn't have any more to worry about. I wouldn't have to worry about going out and getting a job. I'd just stay in the Navy and fight wars and ride ships and play, and that would be it, because they was doing all the thinking for me. And they give us a 24-hour pass that we could go into Chicago or Milwaukee or any place, and everybody talked about Milwaukee, and I'd never been there. And so we went on over into Milwaukee and went into a couple of those breweries. I'd never been in a brewery before. And so many things that happened to me that day that I'd never done before. I outdrank everybody that was in our battalion, and I began to set up a reputation of drinking. And I thought this ain't gonna be too bad either, because I really didn't get drunk. The rest of the guys got pretty well tanked up, and I got them on back to the barracks, and no problems. The thing that happened that day, I was with one of those fellows that was in that battalion with me until I got out of service. There was one with me everywhere I went, and the first time that we would get aboard a ship, those guys say, "You ought to see him drink." And then if somebody would have to challenge me to go out and drink a little bit. And I really thought that I would make good officer material. I thought, this is going to be my life. I'm just going to make a career of this Navy. I would sit there and daydream, the old alcoholic daydream. They had begun to teach us a little bit how you went up in rank, and I could just picture myself being an admiral at Atlantic or Pacific or wherever the hell they wanted to go start a war. And I'd just take my little fleet and go right there and just kick it and go on, just one war right after the other. And if that isn't alcoholic fantasizing. But my career in the Navy was cut a little short. I spent 3 years and 10 months, and I had 33 captain's masts and 4 court-martials. All due to drinking. And when you get that first captain's mast, that kind of cut you off from ever being an admiral and having your own fleet right there. So I was shut down the early part of it. But this was kind of the story of my life. Now, I had never thought of this until I come into AA. I got out of the service. I got married. We had a son. I went from job to job. I was a overhead utility lineman. And I thought I liked that. And I'd go from one position, from one job to the next. And I liked it because we all drank. I look back at some of the times that I would go on the wagon, or I would have to stop drinking for some reason, either to save the marriage or save a job or to keep from going to jail or for some reason be in the hospital, whatever. And my sponsor always said it was the first drink that made you drunk. And I look back and I could never see that. It was always 3 or 4 days down the line that I would get drunk. It wasn't that first day. And we began to start with the last drunk that I was on. I had a sponsor that had more patience than Joe. He would sit and listen to me lie and never opened his mouth. Just let me just go on and on and on. And we got to talking about the first drink, and he asked me, he said, well, when did you have your last drunk? I said, well, right before I came in here. He said, no, but when did it start? And we started tracing back when that last drunk of mine started, and it started about 3 years before I came into the fellowship. There was a few days that I didn't get totally drunk, but there wasn't any days that I didn't drink. And see, my definition of a drunk was when I couldn't walk or talk, then I was drunk. But if I could walk, drive, or talk, well, no way is there anything wrong with me. I can handle it. And we started going back, and I had just went to work for the power company over here some 3 years before I went into the service. A lot of my drinking happened in this area around Fairfax, but I had went to work for the power company down in Alexandria. They had a bowling team. And I can remember a friend of mine lived up the street from my wife, and I had been separated, and we went back together, and I was going to be the good husband and the good father, and I wasn't going to get drunk anymore, and I was going to get on a bowling team and be like a good, normal, reputable citizen and a good community-minded person. And Joe said to me, would I join their bowling team? I said, sure, I'd be happy to. So I went bowling with him that Monday night when he picked me up. He come by there in one of these big long Buicks, and I got in the car with him. He reached under the seat and pulled out a bottle and wanted to know if I wanted to drink. And I says, no, I don't believe it did, Joe. I don't drink. And so we went on and went bowling. Next Monday night he came by and picked me up, same spot, same time. Pulled out in the street and started up towards Bayless Crossroads, reached under the seat and pulled a bottle out, took a drink, slid it back under the seat. And my feelings was hurt. I was really upset. That was the start of a 3-year drunk. I never, from that day until I come into this program, had any sobriety. That was the end of it. It was very slow coming. Now, at this time, I didn't have I was really in bad shape. My wife was having to ride a bus all the way across town. But it gave me that evening to go to the liquor store and get a pint and drink it before she would come home. And that was just the beginning. That finally took me into the last drunk. The last real bad episode that I had. Now, I had been unemployed for about 6 or 8 months. I had tried all my con games, and my skills of conning and lying had run out. And I took a trip. For some reason, I wanted to go to Fort Wayne, Indiana, and back in those days, you could write a check almost on a piece of paper. And I decided to go on out there, and so I had some checks, and some of these banks they didn't even know who I was. And I would go down, people knew me. I had never really shafted anybody real close to us. And so I would go down and I would cash a $100 check, and I would buy a little bit of something, and I went from place to place to place cashing these checks. And when I left that part of Virginia, Alexandria and Shirlington area, I had 2 cases of Old Taylor 100 proof, about 4 cases of beer, and I put them in the back of a little 50 Ford, and I started Fort Wayne, Indiana. I remember leaving Shirlington. The next thing I remember was being in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I don't know how long it took me. I don't know what routes I went, but I remember being at my father-in-law's house, and I went there to tell him something. When I got there, I couldn't remember what I was going to tell him. But they knew that there was something wrong. They looked in the back of my car, and they saw this mess. All of these cases of booze and beer. So I conned them that night, and we went out for dinner. I had some more beer, and, but I could overhear them talking after I went to bed that night that they was going to call my wife. They was going to call Georgia and find out what the story was. And the next day, I would be sober and we could handle it. And I had a friend there, and he kept telling me that there was no answer in the bottom of the bottle. And I can remember this, and this stuck in my mind until I came into the fellowship. He told me that must have been 100 times that night. Well, I thought it was. Anyway, everybody got up the next morning. I don't know whether they made their phone call or not. To this day, I've never questioned it too much. When they went to work, I left. But I can remember drinking these bottles of whiskey or bottles of beer that I had, and I would hold them up and look through them like that, see if I could find anything on the bottom of them. The next thing that I remember, I was in in Peoria, Illinois, and have no idea why I was there. I'd never been to Peoria, had no reason to be there. Didn't know where I was. I was sitting at a service station filling up with fuel and trying to find out where I was at. And this guy just couldn't explain to me. He could tell me what street I was on and what, but hell, I didn't care. I want to know what town and state am I in, you know. That was the last thing I remembered until I pulled back into Burlington, Virginia. And this is where my home had been. And when I pulled back into that backyard, there was a moving van backed up to my back door, taking all the furniture out. And I just couldn't understand this at all. And then the next thing you know, I saw my wife come out and she was helping them. And then my mother-in-law come out and she was helping them. Then my mother-in-law's friend was coming out and she was helping them too. And I couldn't understand why she would even consider leaving such a wonderful husband and father as I was. So when I got through telling this guy that became my sponsor some of these stories, he knew that there was something wrong with me and that there might be a chance he might be able to help me if I would just stay undrunk long enough to be able to see what the problem was. So we started going to AA meetings. Now, I'm here at the Salvation Army Harbor Light, and I don't have a job, and they're giving me foods, and I'm going to prayer meetings 3 or 4 times a day. I get up in the morning, you pray and you eat, and then you go back and pray again. You just do a lot of praying when you're at the Salvation Army. And I began to get real active there. I got to where I was working off destiny. Here I am, I'm 30 years old, pretty good physical shape. Could be working about any. I had pretty good education too. You know, I wasn't a dummy. Far from being illiterate, I had gotten my diploma. I was a high school graduate. I had had some night courses in engineering, and I thought, you know, I'm no dummy. And here I am out here, I'm washing windows, mowing grass, cleaning out people's basement, washing their kitchens. And I thought to myself, hell, this ain't bad at all. And then going back to the Salvation Army Harbor Light, still no responsibility, but I had the FBI and the CIA and the IRS all looking for me, you know. I figured, well, I just won't drink and I'll go in here and close the door every night and everything will be all right. And it wasn't long before my sponsor began to say, you know, one day you're going to have to go back out there and we're going to have to face all these people. And every time he'd say that, I would want to go get drunk. But he would take me to an AA meeting. And I would go in and tell everybody that my name was Ed and I was an alcoholic and not mean one word of it. Sometimes I didn't even mean that I was Ed. I was just tired of it, you know. I wanted out. And he kept me going to meetings and he kept me looking back and looking at this 20/20 vision. Looking back and finding out the things that was wrong with me. And I would like to be able to stand and tell any new person in here that in about 6 or 8 months or so that I did find out what's wrong with me, but it wasn't like that at all. I was sober probably 12 years before I really realized the importance and how the steps were set up. I could read them all, I could understand them, I knew the punctuation, I knew the meaning, but I didn't know how to use them to my life. My sponsor, that particular sponsor, Bob, passed away when I was about 6 years in the program. And I can remember some of the last things he said to me. Ed, I don't know how you do it. You've never really done the first step. And I couldn't understand that. You know, I thought I was doing real well. I mean, hell, I had never had life this well good in all of my old years. You know, I was not drinking. I was smelling good. I had a better than average job, driving a new automobile. And he was saying things like this, you know, and it was really getting to me. Another 5 or 6 years passed, and I happened to be in Ocean City one Sunday morning. A man from Florida got up, and he was going to talk about the steps, and he read the first step. Some 5 years after Bob had died, I knew then what Bob had been trying to tell me. So as I began to get really adapted and get into this fellowship and let this fellowship work for me like they told me it would when I came through the doors, I'd already been sold for 12 years. So for me, it was a smart, real slow process. I have to use the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and my past all the time. I have to see where my improvements are, where I'm going to spiritually, because they told me several things were going to happen. One of them, they told me that if I didn't grow spiritually daily, that probably I would get drunk again. And that the same man that drank didn't change. He would get drunk again. And see, I was so sick that I didn't know that. I knew I was smart, but I was sick. And I couldn't see these changes. I had been a long time when I came in here and I met this guy, Bob, that I hadn't laughed. And I can remember one of the things that happened that got Bob started on these steps with me. He says, they will become a part of your life once you let them in. He also told me one of the first things, and this come a whole lot before the steps did, he says, once you let laughter enter your thinking and become a part of your life, you'll learn to laugh. And I doubted most everything he was telling me, but anyway, he was there. I hadn't been in the program very long. And right before the meeting, we was talking about one of these guys. And two fellows come down there to bring a meeting, and they was talking. And one of them told a story about a guy that wanted to be a paratrooper. And it seems this fellow wanted so bad to be a paratrooper. And he went out and went through all the physical and passed all the tests, done all the jumping off the tire and everything, but when he got him up in the plane, he wouldn't jump out. Not knowing why, but he just wouldn't jump. And they took him back down to go wash him out. And then the story becomes part of like my life is, I wanted to be a part of it, but I didn't want to take the chances to suffer the consequences, so I have to start lying and conning again. So this guy lied and conned his way back in to let him go through that same procedure again. Same thing happened again. The expert of what he was doing, like I was an expert of being a lying, thieving, conning alcoholic. This guy wanted to be a paratrooper, or he wanted all the glories of being one anyway. So he conned him and let him go the third time. And they told him when he got up there, I said, buddy, you going this time. He says, when we throw you out, if you just reach up there and pull that black cord and nothing happens, you pull the red one, there'll be a Jeep down there waiting for you to bring you back over here. So they threw him out. He pulled the black cord and nothing happened. He pulled the red cord and nothing happened. He said, I bet that damn Jeep won't be down there either. Now, when I heard that, that had been the first time that I had laughed in a long time. And then some of the things that Bob told me began to pass. I let that in. Then I slowly began to let the steps in. I let these steps into my life a long time before I knew what they meant. The day that I had my last drink, the steps became a part of my life. Only I didn't know it. I was talking over here not long ago, and I used to do a lot of drinking here in Manassas and around the racetrack over here, the old Dominion racetrack. My father lived up here. He drank a little bit. And on one of my last drunks, we was up here, there's two little stories I'd like to tell you about just what my drinking's like and just here. My father was over here, and I hadn't drank anything for a little while, and we went up there to see him one Sunday, and I don't know how long it's been since I'd had a drink, maybe a month, 2 months. And the 7-Elevens had just come into being, and my wife said, boy, I'd sure like to have a Coke. So, man, I peeled into 7-Eleven there that had the old gravel parking lots in, and I went in, and I got her a Coke, and I got my son one of these little slushy ice cream things. And up in the showcase behind me was a Black Label. And I said, well, hell, one Black Label ain't gonna hurt nobody. And no longer than it took me to walk from where I was standing to that case, my hand went over top of that one can of Black Label and picked up a six-pack. And as Bob says, it's all the time you was doing that, your brain was thinking of the lie. It was going to tell your wife as soon as you went back out there in the car and sat down and started to drive off. Because the first thing she's going to say to you is, why today? You know, it's just normal. And sure enough, I picked up a six-pack and I walked out there and she didn't even have to say anything. But, you know, and I don't know whether it was what she said or what anyway, and I can remember saying to her, well, I'm only going to drink one. I'm going to take the rest of them up to my dad. And then it was what she either said or didn't say or whatever. You know, that I've never found a word for it yet. I don't see any help coming right now. But at that communication gap that you have, you know, between the spouse and the people you're in contact with when you're drinking, it just went. So I drank about 4 of those beers in the next few miles going up there to Centerville, and I put the other 2 under my seat, and I said, don't you tell my dad these right here, because you know how he is when he drinks. Those are the type of drunks that I would get on. And I'd been up there probably with my dad, hadn't just not long after that, and I had still had an old navy white blanket that I kept in that old car of mine. And as I was coming out the road here and getting ready to cross Bull Run, I had the strangest feeling come over. I knew that I was about ready to just fly apart. I was shaking, and I was beginning to kind of hallucinate, and I thought, man, if I can just make it to that bridge, if I can just get that far, I'll park this car there, and I'll just go down there and lay under that bridge for a little while. And I took that thing, and I had a bottle of whiskey, and I took that white blanket, and I got under that bridge, and I rolled up just as tight as I could get in there, thinking, I don't know how much time passed. But when I came to this day, I don't know anything about the bottle, but when I came to, there was blood all around me, and the whole corner of that blanket was missing. I had eaten the whole corner of that blanket. I had no idea how long I laid there or what. My body was so sore that I could hardly move, and when sometime during my coming up with my sponsor, Bob, telling him some of the things that happened to me, he said, you know, you're lucky to be alive. He said, you should have died right under that bridge. And then he told me a story about him being under a bridge in Philadelphia. You know, this is how this fellowship works. I tell something that happens to me, and somebody else tells something that happens to them, and something good is supposed to come out of it. Bob said to me, I was under a bridge in Philadelphia, and we was bringing out some sterno, and I was telling them how good AA was. And they was working on the path around the wine bottle, and I kept telling them how good AA was, and they got tired of listening to it, and one of them says, so damn good, why are you here drinking our wine and sterno? So Bob, after this, he said, you know, that preyed on my mind for so long that I finally come back to Washington, coming into the place that I finally got into some 3 years or 4 years before I got there. And the gentleman that took him in, I see him often. He's an officer in the Salvation Army. And he said, Bob, I'm going to let you come in and spend the night. But it's only God and His infinite mercy can help you. You'll never get sober. And that was Bob's last drink. You know, so when you share those stories of what can happen, it was things like that kept me not drinking again. And the more that we talked about these things, the more I looked at these steps, you know, the insanity and turning my will and my life over to care of God as I understood Him, and taking an inventory. I worked on that 4th step for almost, well, I finally took the 5th step about 4 or 5 months before Bob died. And I had spent almost 4 years taking an immoral inventory. I could not read the step. I couldn't get it together. I just sat and wrote immoral stuff down that I had done and still wasn't through. And finally Bob one day took me into this little cubicle he had for an office, and he said, Ed, read the 4th step to me. And I was about twice his size, and that was a small room. So I can remember standing in that room and him sitting behind that little desk that he had there. And I would read this step to him, and he'd say, now read it to me again. And I would read it to him. He said, read it again. And boy, I could feel the blood vessels in my neck begin to pop out. You know, I was really getting angry. He says, show me anywhere in there that says anything about taking an immoral inventory. And he had to sit down and explain the step to me the best that I could understand it. Far from being the way I understand it today. And thank God. This is a program that I can continue to get better in all the time. The steps in this fellowship, after they was once read to me, and I would like to just go through them briefly, how they was finally explained to me where I could understand them. And in step one, it said my life had become unmanageable. And I used to think it said it had become unmanaged. That my life had become unmanaged. And then when I finally found out that my life had become unmanageable, that I wasn't going to ever be able to repair it again. You know, that was it. It was just unmanageable. But you people, the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous in its entirety, done a wonderful job. It was proved to me after I was in the fellowship about 6 years, 7 years. It was after my sponsor died. And for some reason, I went to a meeting every night for the first 5 years I was in the program. And for some reason, one night, I didn't go to a meeting, and nothing happened. I didn't get drunk. I really missed not going, because I had probably made an AA contact that day. But I think after I come into this fellowship, probably 90% of the people that I associate with are people in this fellowship. And wasn't long after that one day led into just like my drunks were. Wasn't long before I wasn't going to a meeting once a week. And I wasn't going to 2 meetings a week. It wasn't long, I wasn't going to any meetings at all. And I had left Washington about this time, moved into a farm down here in Madison County. And, you know, kind of going to relax a little bit. You know, I don't have the disease anymore, and I don't have to go to meetings every night anymore, and things are going to be a lot better, and I'll have more time to do other things. And then the second part of that first step come in and beat me to death again. And when it did, I found myself laying in a plowed field, beating my fist against the ground, wondering what in the world's wrong with me. Don't you know there was 2 old drunks from down in Culpeper come over and pick me up, or I met them, and we started going back to meetings, and things began to get better. Immediately, I began to go to meetings every night. My life became manageable again. Do you know it was another 4 years, or almost 5 years, before I really realized what had happened? That I had really, then was the first time that I heard the man in Ocean City say and read the first step where I understood it. And then I began to put these steps together after that 12 years or so, and I began to apply them to my life. I applied them to my life as they were written in a book. I didn't add anything. I didn't take anything out of them. And if there was any question whatsoever, I didn't think about it. I went and asked my sponsor or somebody. By this time, I had gotten another sponsor. In fact, I have 2 sponsors now, and I recommended this to anybody. Because when Bob died, he had been telling me for a long time, said, Ed, you ought to have 2 sponsors. You never know when one of us might get hit by a streetcar. Or you might take a drink. So anyway, he died, and I was lost. I was totally lost without a sponsor, so now I have 2. In fact, while I'm on sponsors, I'm going to tell you another reason to have 2. The sponsor I have now has got 46 years in the program, and wonderful guy. This fellow knows me probably better than I know myself. But when he came my sponsor through a fellow that he was sponsoring. The guy's name was Tommy L. from Luray, Virginia. Upstart Blackstone.
he spoke all over the world, and I thought, you know, this is one time that I will never have to worry about a sponsor getting drunk or having problems. And Tommy was sober 27 years and 8 months and took drunk. I grew a lot from that experience. Julian told me a long time before he did, he said, Ed, spend a lot of time with Tommy. Tommy needs somebody to be with him. And I look back sometimes and, and I just didn't spend enough time with him. But that's what this fellowship is all about. Love and understanding. I knew then that I'm not home free. I got a long ways to go, and that's the reason I make a little over 300 meetings every year. And I'm proud to be able to do it too, but that's what sponsorship's all about. Be close to them, love them. I touch a lot of people's lives down in where I come through, down in Elkton. But I will never be able to give to them what they give me. And that's important. Going on down through the steps and how they became a part of my life, I went through this bit of the insanity. I had to work that step, and the only way that I could work it was through the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was a sick person, and I didn't know that. I didn't know that until I could sit and share all of these experiences with you and let you share with me, and then I could look at the insanity that I had and couldn't do anything about, and the only way that I could do anything about it was support of the power greater than myself, which I chose to choose God and the people in these rooms. This is where I found God. I never knew a God before I came here. I might talk about one. Then I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood it. And the God that I understood was the one that I found in the second step. And when I did that, I got away from one thing that my sponsor got on me real early about. Every time some little situation would come up and I'd talk about turning it over, he said, you better damn sight do something about it so I can go back and read the third step again. And I went back and I read it like it was written. Third step says I turned my will and my life over. That's all. Doesn't say anything about my wife, my job, my money problems, or any other problems. My will and my life. And this let me go on down. By this time, I was then kind of strong enough to get past an immoral inventory and do something about immoral inventory. I know I'm about out of time. But there's two prayers in this program that has helped me a lot. The third prayer, third step prayer, and the 11th step prayer. And the 11th step prayer is the prayer where we do a lot of meditating and a lot of thinking. And it also gives us a lot of direction. It gives me the direction to take my days day by day. It says, sought through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact with God as I understand Him, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and power to carry that out. And I learned that the hard way. Again, going back through the years of looking back at the 2020 vision, while I was at the Harbor Light, these first 100 days that I was undrunk in this fellowship, I'd been on a trip with them down to play games. We'd been playing pinochle and stuff down Fort Belvoir. And on the way back, I missed the bus, and I happened to get in a car with my sponsor and this captain that was in the Salvation Army. And they got to talking about prayer, and I had just been undrunk long enough not to know when to keep my mouth shut. And I said to them, I pray a lot, but my prayer is not answered. And I thought they was going to stop that car right there in the middle of Shirley Highway. One of them turned around to me and said, all prayers are answered. Some of them are no, some of them are maybe, some of them will wait a while, some of them you got to do a little bit more work on them, and you got to pray a little longer, and patience, and all these other stuff. And then I have this deep voice of this little old skinny sponsor of mine coming, you have to get off your knees and do something about it. And that bothered me. All the other words hadn't had any effect on me whatsoever, but when he said to get off your knees and do something about it, that was just like hitting me in the head with a hammer. I was brought up in an area and a culture that you didn't let nobody put you on your knees. You just didn't go down, period. That was it. I mean, you'd give your life up before you get on your knees. And so this thing began to worry me, and I thought to myself, somewhere I read in there, I'd have to go to any lengths if I was going to stay sober. And by this time, I had begun to enjoy being undrunk. And finally, after about 3 weeks, I had taken all I could take. It was mentally beating me to death, this getting on my knees. And I can remember walking into this barracks, and it was like I said, about 60 men in there, and we all had these bunk beds. And I said, I'm going to get on my knees, and the first one of those jokers that laughs at me, I'm going to pick this bed up and throw it at him and go on out and get drunk. And I got on my knees, and so help me, that's the best thing that ever happened to me in my life, besides having my last drunk. I don't know what happened. I don't know whether it's because it was the first time in my life that I had surrendered because I wanted to, or just totally surrendered to what happened, but my life took another step towards a comfortable sobriety right then. I have no idea what happened. The key was that I was willing to get on my knees, which meant that was the hardest thing for me to do. And I was willing to go to that length, and I'm sure that I would be willing to go to any other length. I heard a lot when I came into this fellowship. Heard a lot about, I never had to sober up again if I didn't want to. The first year I was sober, I saved enough money to buy a brand new automobile. My wife and I went back together. We have another wonderful son that's now 27 years old this month. We're married 41 years this month, and I didn't think I'd ever see the day we would live together after I was on my last drunk. And it's all due to you people. 41 years of coming back to the same meeting house and passing through other people and passing on your experiences and things that have happened to you, and the good things and the bad things and the indifferent things, the things that I used to think that nobody had these types of problems, or nobody thinks like this. And I've never thought of anything or said anything, and somebody didn't come up and say, well, I'll do that. I'd like to leave you with one little thing. I had somebody come into a meeting right after I got sober, and they read this thing to me, and I thought, well, that's good for them, but I don't think that I will ever. I've been sober long enough to know it's going to take a lot to do anything to get me squared away. And this man read his poem, and I've carried his poem, and I read it, and I worked on it as much as I can, and as hard as I can, as honest as I can, and that's all this fellowship asks us for. Don't drink, go to meetings, and keep it simple. My sponsor, I used to tell Bob, well, how do you do a 12-step work? How do you do that? And he'd say, don't drink, go to meetings, and keep it simple. But I said, suppose I have to go somewhere. He says, don't drink, go to meetings, and keep it simple. And in other words, what he was telling me, just shut my mouth and go in there and look good. Many of you probably heard this. It's the man in the glass. When you get what you want in your struggle for self, and the world makes you king for a day, just go to the mirror and look at yourself and see what that man has to say. For it isn't your father or mother or wife whose judgment upon you must pass. The fellow whose verdict counts most in your life is the one staring back from the glass. Some people may think you're a straight shooting chum and call you a wonderful guy, but the man in the glass said you're only a bum if you can't look him straight in the eye. He's the fellow to please, never mind all the rest, for he's with you clear up to the end, and you've passed your most dangerous and difficult test if the man in the glass is your friend. You may fool the whole world down the pathway of life and get pats on the back as you pass, but your physical reward will be heartaches and tears if you cheated the man in the glass. I want to thank y'all for letting me come over here and share this with you. God bless you, and I hope you're here for the next year. Thank you.